The post roads of the Roman Empire, building the arteries of communication. When you think of the Roman Empire, you may imagine marble temples, gladiatorial games, or the clash of legions in distant lands. Yet one of Rome's most enduring legacies was far less dramatic: its roads. Beyond their use for armies, Rome's roads formed the foundation of an organized postal system, Cursus Publicus, that bound the empire together. These post roads were not glamorous, but they were essential, carrying messages, officials, and goods across thousands of miles. Without them, Rome's vast territories would have fallen into confusion. The origins of Roman roads. Roman roads began as military necessities. As early as the 4th century BCE, the Via Appia connected Rome to Capua, allowing legions to move swiftly to the south. Over time, this network expanded across Italy and then the provinces, reaching as far as Britain, North Africa, and the Near East. The engineering was meticulous. Roads were built with multiple layers: a foundation of stones, a middle layer of gravel or sand, and a surface of tightly fitted paving stones. Drainage ditches lined the sides, ensuring durability. Bridges spanned rivers, while milestones marked distances. The result was a system so well built that many stretches remain visible today. Yet the roads were not only for soldiers. As Rome expanded, it needed a way to govern its provinces, collect taxes, and maintain communication. The post roads became the arteries of empire. The Cursus Publicus. The Cursus Publicus, or public courier system, was established by Augustus in the 1st century BCE. It was essentially a state-run postal service, designed to ensure that messages and officials could travel quickly and securely. Along major roads, stations were established at regular intervals. These were known as mutations, for changing horses, and mansions, for resting. A traveler on official business could stop at a mutatio, exchange a tired horse for a fresh one, and continue at speed. At a mantio, they could rest, eat, and find lodging. This system allowed messages to travel remarkable distances. A well-organized courier could cover 50 miles a day on horseback, sometimes more. In emergencies, relays of riders could carry dispatches hundreds of miles in just a few days. Astonishing speed for the ancient world. Who used the system? The post roads were not for everyone. Ordinary people could not simply send a letter from Rome to Gaul. Access to the Cursus Publicus required an official permit, known as a diploma. These were issued by the emperor or high-ranking officials and were carefully controlled to prevent abuse. Users included provincial governors, military commanders, tax collectors, and couriers carrying imperial decrees. Goods important to the state, grain, tribute, or supplies for legions, were also moved along these routes. In this way, the roads and the postal system reinforced imperial authority, ensuring that the emperor's will could reach even the farthest corners of the empire. The daily work of the stations. Life at a post station was repetitive. At a mutatio, workers tended stables, fed horses, and prepared fresh mounts for passing couriers. At a mantio, cooks prepared meals, attendants cleaned rooms, and clerks recorded arrivals and departures. Archaeological excavations reveal the structures of these stations: courtyards surrounded by stables, simple rooms for rest, kitchens, and sometimes bathhouses. Inscriptions sometimes mention the staff, slaves, freedmen, or soldiers, who performed the endless tasks of maintaining the system. Their work was not glamorous, but it kept the empire connected. Messages and speed. What did these couriers carry? Primarily official letters, sealed with wax and often marked with the emperor's signet. Military orders, administrative decrees, financial accounts, all moved along the post roads. Speed was essential. A delay in transmitting orders could mean disaster on the battlefield or chaos in a province. Records suggest that news of an emperor's death could travel across the empire in a matter of weeks, an astonishing feat considering the distances involved. Yet the system was not infallible. Bad weather, bandit attacks, or worn-out horses could slow progress. Roads required constant maintenance, and without upkeep, their surfaces deteriorated. The Cursus Publicus worked only because of endless, quiet labor behind the scenes. The costs of maintenance. Running the system was expensive. Local communities were often required to provide supplies, horses, and labor, a burden known as the Angaria. This obligation could be resented, as it diverted resources from farming and trade. Yet it was essential for keeping the imperial machine running. The empire also invested directly in road repairs, bridge construction, and milestones. Inscriptions on surviving milestones often note which emperor funded repairs, turning even maintenance into propaganda. To walk along a Roman road was to see reminders of imperial authority carved in stone. The roads as bureaucracy. The post roads illustrate Rome's reliance on bureaucracy. They were not simply paths through the countryside, but carefully measured, regulated, and recorded systems. Distances were marked, stations cataloged, and permits issued. Every step of the process reinforced hierarchy. Only those with authority could command the system, and only those who served it could sustain it. For the traveler, the experience must have felt both empowering and tedious. The ability to cover great distances quickly, but only by presenting documents at every station, changing horses, and moving on without pause. It was a system of speed built upon rules. Reflection. Hadrian's Wall, salt caravans, Cleopatra's court, all these required communication. Orders had to travel, taxes had to be collected, and armies had to be directed. The Roman post roads made this possible. They were not glorious monuments, but they were the silent infrastructure of empire. As you imagine a courier galloping along the Via Appia, pausing at a mutatio to change horses, then setting off again with a sealed dispatch, you might wonder, was it the legions that held Rome together, or the quiet efficiency of its roads and couriers, carrying words instead of weapons? Travelers, couriers, and the daily grind of the Cursus Publicus. You have seen how the Roman post roads were laid out, engineered, and supplied with stations. But roads are not only stone and gravel. They are the people who use them. The Cursus Publicus, the imperial courier system, was more than an administrative invention. It was an experience lived by couriers, officials, station workers, and even the occasional traveler who found themselves permitted to use it. To understand the system, you must imagine the journeys made along these roads, repetitive, necessary, and often exhausting. The courier's burden. The life of a courier was demanding. A rider, entrusted with imperial messages, was expected to cover long distances quickly. Each carried a satchel sealed with wax or leather ties, often containing orders that could determine the fate of provinces. The responsibility was immense, but the work itself was monotonous. Mile after mile of road, with only milestones and way stations to break the landscape. At each mutatio, change station, the courier presented documents proving their right to a fresh horse. Stable workers, accustomed to endless arrivals, quickly exchanged saddles and harnesses. Then, without delay, the courier rode on. This pattern repeated dozens of times. The rhythm of empire carried on hoofbeats and signatures. Speed was everything. A courier might ride through rain, snow, or blistering sun. If they faltered, the message faltered. The empire demanded endurance, and the road demanded patience. The mansions, rest houses, every 20 to 30 miles, larger stations called mansions provided rest for officials and couriers. These were not luxurious inns, but functional establishments. Dormitories, kitchens, storage rooms, and sometimes baths. Here, a weary traveler could eat bread and stew, drink watered wine, and sleep briefly before resuming the road. The staff of a mancio lived repetitive lives. Cooks boiled the same meals, stable hands tended the same horses, clerks copied the same records. Their duty was not glamorous, but it sustained the system. Archaeological remains of these sites reveal courtyards for horses, tiled floors in communal rooms, and inscriptions noting repairs ordered by emperors. Every detail spoke of routine maintenance. For an official traveling hundreds of miles, the mancio was a relief, a pause in the grind of the road. For the workers who lived there permanently, it was the center of a life defined by service to the empire's endless need for communication. Travelers beyond couriers. While the Cursus Publicus was restricted, not all who traveled Rome's roads were couriers. Governors moving between provinces, military commanders inspecting garrisons, and tax officials carrying records all used the system. Each held a diploma, a written permit authorizing them to requisition horses, food, and lodging. Some private individuals, by favor or bribe, gained temporary access. A merchant supplying the army or a scholar under imperial patronage might travel with the privileges of the postal system. For them, the roads offered speed and safety not available to ordinary travelers, who relied on slower carts or their own feet. The distinction was sharp. The roads belonged to Rome, but only those sanctioned by authority could use their full efficiency. Others looked on, perhaps envious, as couriers galloped past with fresh mounts while they trudged along on foot. Bureaucracy on the road. Every stage of the journey was bound by paperwork. A courier presented their diploma at each station, where clerks recorded the date, time, and resources supplied. These records ensured accountability and prevented misuse. For the traveler, the process must have felt repetitive. At each stop, the same ritual: present the document, wait for approval, mount a new horse, ride on. The repetition was the system's strength, ensuring uniformity across provinces. Yet it also made the experience tedious, a bureaucratic march measured in miles instead of hours. This bureaucracy extended to milestones. Every Roman mile, about 1,480 meters, a stone marker recorded the distance to the nearest town or city. Many bore inscriptions praising the emperor who had built or repaired the road. For the courier, these stones were reminders of progress, but also reminders of Rome's authority, carved literally into the path beneath their hooves. The roads themselves. Traveling on a Roman road was not always smooth. While famous stretches of paving stones remain visible today, not all roads were paved. Many were gravel or packed earth, especially in remote provinces. In wet weather, ditches overflowed, turning surfaces muddy. In mountainous terrain, switchbacks slowed travel. Bridges, though marvels of engineering, required constant upkeep. A courier might pass through varied landscapes in a single day: rolling plains, river crossings, thick forests, and fortified towns. Each terrain posed challenges, but the roads endured because of Rome's commitment to maintenance. Legions stationed in provinces often doubled as labor crews, repairing damaged stretches when not on campaign. Still, the experience of travel was long and repetitive. The steady rhythm of hoofbeats, the passing of milestones, the arrival at yet another station. These were the realities of Roman communication. Dangers of the road. Though the roads were safer than open countryside, dangers remained. Bandits lurked in remote areas, preying on isolated travelers. Soldiers sometimes patrolled, but protection was never guaranteed. Bad weather posed greater risks. Swollen rivers, washed-out bridges, or icy passes could halt progress. To guard against these threats, couriers often traveled in pairs or small groups. Their duty was to the message, not themselves. If one rider faltered, another carried on. The empire's need for communication demanded redundancy, even at personal cost. Messages of empire. What kinds of messages traveled these roads? Orders from emperors to governors, instructions for taxation, appointments of officials, decrees on law, reports from provincial governors to Rome, updates on harvests, troop movements, or local unrest, military dispatches, orders to mobilize, supply requests, casualty lists. Each message was sealed, its contents often unknown to the courier. Yet within those wax seals lay decisions that could change lives. A governor recalled, a tax increased, a legion redeployed. These choices moved silently along the road, carried by riders whose task was not to question but to deliver. The human side of the system. While the Cursus Publicus was efficient, it was also human. Couriers grew tired, horses grew lame, and clerks made errors. A missing entry in a logbook could delay a traveler. A broken harness could halt a journey for hours. Letters from antiquity occasionally complain about these inconveniences. Officials grumbled about poor horses or inadequate lodging. Emperors issued decrees chastising station workers for negligence. Behind the image of imperial order was the daily reality of human fallibility. And yet, the system endured for centuries. Its endurance lay not in perfection, but in persistence. The willingness of thousands of workers to repeat the same tasks, day after day, keeping the roads alive. Reflection. To think of the Roman post roads is to think not of glory, but of routine. Horses exchanged, documents checked, milestones passed. It was a system of repetition, bureaucracy, and endurance. Yet it was this very monotony that allowed the empire to function. As you picture a courier riding north from Rome, his cloak wrapped against the wind, his satchel sealed with imperial orders, you might ask, was the true strength of Rome its legions and emperors? Or was it the quiet persistence of couriers and clerks, repeating their duties until the empire's words could stretch as far as its armies? Decline, memory, and the long echo of Roman roads. We have walked with Roman couriers as they galloped from station to station, stopped at milestones, and slept in simple rest houses. We have seen the endless routine of clerks and stable hands, whose work sustained the machinery of communication. But no system lasts forever. Like the empire itself, the Cursus Publicus eventually weakened, adapted, and faded into memory. And yet its imprint, carved into landscapes and cultures, remained long after Rome fell. The cost of empire. The Cursus Publicus was efficient, but it was also costly. Maintaining horses, stations, and staff across thousands of miles required constant investment. Local communities bore much of this burden, supplying labor, food, and animals under the obligation known as the angaria. Over time, resentment grew. By the 3rd century CE, as the empire faced increasing financial strain, the system became harder to sustain. Civil wars, barbarian invasions, and inflation drained resources. Emperors attempted reforms, sometimes reducing the number of stations, sometimes shifting the burden of supply, but the strain was evident. What had once been a proud mechanism of imperial order became, in many regions, a source of hardship and neglect, corruption and abuse. As the empire weakened, so too did discipline within the postal system. Records of the late empire mention corruption, officials issuing false permits, private travelers bribing their way into the system, and wealthy individuals abusing privileges meant for state business. Horses were overworked, stations underfunded, and clerks underpaid. Travelers complained of poor conditions, ragged animals, and delays. What had once symbolized Roman efficiency became, by the 4th and 5th centuries, a reminder of decline. And yet, even in decay, the Cursus Publicus continued to function, patchily, imperfectly, but still carrying the empire's words along its crumbling roads. Roads without empire. When Rome withdrew from provinces like Britain, the formal courier system collapsed, but the roads themselves remained. Villagers used them to reach markets, farmers to move goods, and monks to travel between monasteries. Though milestones crumbled and mansions fell into ruin, the routes endured as practical paths through the landscape. In some regions, medieval kings repurposed the Roman roads for their own messengers. In others, the stones were quarried for new buildings, leaving only faint traces of the original structure. But everywhere Rome had built, the land bore the imprint of its roads, straight lines across hills, enduring even when the empire that built them had vanished. Memory in the Middle Ages. Medieval chroniclers sometimes marveled at the old Roman roads, admiring their straightness and durability. They called them works of giants or attributed them to legendary kings. Few remembered the details of the Cursus Publicus, but the roads themselves were undeniable, reminders of a past order that seemed both distant and superior. In monasteries, where learning survived, scholars copied Roman texts describing roads and measures. These writings preserved fragments of memory, distances between towns, names of stations, lists of provinces. The Itinerarium Antonini, a Roman register of road routes, survived as a medieval manuscript, a faint echo of the once living network. The long legacy. Even after the collapse of the system, the idea of organized communication endured. Medieval rulers developed their own courier services, though far less extensive than Rome's. Kings of France, England, and the Holy Roman Empire established messenger networks, often modeled on what they knew of Roman precedent. Centuries later, in the early modern period, when national postal services emerged, reformers sometimes invoked Rome as an example. The notion of post stations, permits, and relays of horses was not invented anew. It was remembered, consciously or unconsciously, from the Roman world. Thus, the Cursus Publicus was not only a practical system, but also a model, a memory of how vast territories could be bound together by roads and routine. Archaeology of the post roads. Modern archaeology reveals the quiet details of this system. Excavations at former mansions uncover foundations of courtyards and stables. Inscriptions on milestones record the names of emperors who ordered repairs, showing how even road maintenance became a tool of propaganda. Fragments of wax tablets hint at the paperwork that accompanied each journey. These remains remind us that the system was not an abstraction, but a lived reality. Horses sweated, clerks wrote, travelers ate meals of bread and stew, and couriers dozed in barracks before riding again. The stones still visible across Europe today are only the surface. Beneath them lies a history of repetition and endurance. Reflection. The Roman post roads were not grand spectacles, but they were powerful. They carried no legions, only words. And yet those words commanded legions, governed provinces, and held the empire together. Their strength lay in their monotony, the endless exchange of horses, the constant recording of arrivals, the slow accumulation of movement across centuries. Today, when you send an email or a letter, you participate in a tradition that stretches back to these roads. The infrastructure of communication, now invisible and instantaneous, was once measured in horse hooves and milestones. So as you picture a lone courier on a misty Roman road, cloak pulled tight, satchel sealed with wax, you might ask, was the greatness of Rome written in marble and conquest, or was it whispered along these roads, carried patiently from station to station until words became empire?